I don't have to tell you things are bad. Everybody knows things are bad. It's a depression. Everybody's out of work or scared of losing their job. The dollar buys a nickel's worth. Banks are going bust. Shopkeepers keep a gun under the counter. Punks are running wild in the street, and there's nobody anywhere who seems to know what to do, and there's no end to it.
I know that this is yet another video where I talk in front of gameplay footage with no editing at all, but this message is extremely urgent, very time sensitive, and I want to make sure that I get this out because I have a plethora of other video projects that I'm currently working on that are much more involved in editing. I'm even having one person help me with my editing process. Shout out to my friend, you know who you are. So just because I put out one of these videos where I don't do any editing at all and you just see me playing Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3+4 doesn't necessarily mean I'm not editing videos in the background. This is just that video where I'm gonna have to get this message out urgently. So I want to talk about freedom of speech. Now, if you followed my channel, I made a YouTube community post touching on this already, but I wanted to immortalize this sentiment more broadly in the form of a video. Right now, we're at an age to where we are rapidly losing our freedom of speech. Now, when I say freedom of speech, I'm not necessarily just talking about trans people or left-leaning people. I'm talking about everyone. Because let's face it, even if it was just exclusively trans and left-leaning people who are in danger here, this goes for everybody. The whole shtick here is that if the state apparatus is allowed to suppress freedom of speech or to permit one form of oppression towards one group of people and it goes uncorrected, then what precedent are we setting for the state apparatus to do the same to pretty much just about anyone else? The way that I've been interpreting the Donald Trump administration up until now, especially during the first one, is that Donald Trump is implementing a lot of the policies that America has implemented all across the globe whenever it overthrows a Latin American country or a Middle Eastern country or attempts to overthrow an Asian country like Vietnam, and then they plant like their own puppet dictatorship that will do the bidding of the United States government or a US corporation or two. Speaking extremely broadly here, what ends up happening is the repression of not just freedom of speech, but people's ability to assemble, to organize, to be able to demand better working conditions, to be able to have some semblance of self-determination. Now, of course, what I just described is nothing new if you are familiar with settler colonial history. But what I'm saying here is that the attributes that we're seeing in the United States within its borders to even U.S. citizens is a byproduct of all of that history of U.S. imperialism across the world. And not to mention that, like, a lot of people, especially U.S. politicians who are extremely xenophobic, are more than willing to vilify immigrants, saying that immigrants are stealing our jobs, which is impossible, stealing our welfare, stealing our taxpayer dollars, which is impossible. It's all impossible. If you know even slightly how the system works, you know that those avenues of exploitation of the system are impossible. Because if you know anybody who does have welfare or who does have SNAP or something like that, you know that that kind of manipulation of the system or rigging of the system, cheating of the system is not feasible. Yet multiple U.S. politicians are more than willing to vilify immigrants for supposedly stealing our jobs, which, by the way, if that is the case, shouldn't you be blaming entrepreneurs to begin with, since they're the ones hiring immigrants? The logic of blaming your own social class for the exploitation that is caused by the ruling class is absolutely stupid. And yet it is by design, because at the end of the day, can immigrants even vote within the country? No, they can't, and that's really the point that I'm getting at here. Immigrants have come to the United States most of the time after the result of US imperialism, and particularly Latin American immigrants come to the United States after our government has invaded their countries, overthrew their government, installed their government with a puppet dictatorship that has US foreign interests specifically in mind. Meaning they can't even vote within their own country sometimes. You even have places like Puerto Rico, which is a US territory, forced to be one, by the way, against their will by our government, and they can't even vote in our presidential elections. Think about it, this is an entire island of people who don't have voting rights. So the reason why I went on this other tangent about US imperialism for the first 5 minutes of the video is primarily because this is the precedent that we have set for what the state apparatus is allowed to do. Whenever you hear of US imperialism and the stories of US imperialism and how horrifying US imperialism is, you then have to confront yourself and truly realize that there is a precedent being set not just for other countries across the world, especially those who are invaded by the United States, but also for yourself as a US citizen. And, you know, I hate using the phrase US citizen. It gives me kind of like an ick. I don't really have any sense of US patriotism or nationalism, any kind of that inside of my moral DNA whatsoever. And I think that for the most part, most people can agree with that common sentiment. Even if you do have a favorable view of the United States, you're not exactly denying that the United States government is a piece of shit country, or maybe in some cases, depending on who is the leader of the administration, but that's another topic for another time. But being a US citizen does mean that you have a lot of privilege. You have the ability to do something, to say something. It does mean that you can vote. It does mean that your words do carry more weight within the broader context of the American discourse. This is not saying that non-citizens don't matter. This is to say that if you are a US citizen, if you were born in the United States, and if you do have white privilege, you should be using it to push forward any sense of freedom and liberation for all, and not just for yourself. And so that's why I'm making this video, because I feel that I am losing my freedom of speech, and I want to talk about ways in which I feel that my freedom of speech is going to inevitably be infringed upon at some point, and actually in some ways has been infringed upon in the past. So I've already made a video talking about this, but I'm going to give a brief summary of the time I was visited by the Secret Services in 2019. So Willem von Spronsen infiltrated an ICE detention center in Tacoma, Washington with a rifle and some propane tanks. He died as a result of this stunt, and while I can't condone adventurism or really condone, legally speaking, what Willem von Spronsen did, I made a video on my former YouTube channel, that it's not this one, saying that I really appreciated and even supported what he did. And that's still true today. I think that what Willem von Spronsen did, though tactically foolish, was the right thing to do. And it was definitely something that I wanted to see more of, because I wanted to see more people standing up to authority and to actually attempt to make real, meaningful change in a system where liberals have quashed all elements of being able to do just that within its system. This video that I made caught the attention of right-wing media, and right-wing media reported on it. I also got a ton of death threats from neo-Nazis with actual swastikas in the profile pictures themselves giving me death threats. And then I was visited by the Secret Services because they thought that I was going to be a copycat activist, that I was going to also do another targeting of an ICE detention center, but that I was also going to attempt to kill Donald Trump. Now, at the time, I was living in the state of California, where gun control is horrifying. It's a Republican policy, by the way, if you don't know your gun control history. And I did not have a gun at the time. I did not have any weapons or explosives or anything of that sort to try to do that. much less did I have any of the means to be able to try to pull something off like that. But yet, they visited me. They also visited several of my friends, and most importantly, they visited my job, which resulted in the alienation of a lot of people, including friends and including my job. Yes, it ruined my life, because people thought that I was too loose-lipped about things, I guess. Ever since then, I've been really struggling to be able to maintain a living. Though it's not been impossible, it's been definitely a struggle. But when it comes to those friends that I used to have, I, for the longest time, tried to tell other people, whoever I told the story to not blame my former friends because they just wanted to protect themselves, to keep themselves safe. And at the end of the day, I don't think they truly hated me. I just think that they wanted to keep themselves safe. They were scared that the Secret Service has knocked on their door, as I would be as well if the Secret Service has knocked on my door. Although, maybe brush up on your basic constitutional rights if something like that ever does happen to you. But I want to talk now briefly and then come back to this in regards to more recent current events that had to do more broadly with violence against Donald Trump, with violence against ICE, with violence against right-wing activists, meaning particularly Charlie Kirk, the Dallas shooting where ICE was targeted. Well, really, it was detainees that were shot, not ICE officers and agents. And of course, Donald Trump was fired at in the ear in the summer of 2024. Ironically, right when I was on my way to perform at a Turf Stomp concert, of all things. So my alibi for that in particular is a whole concert that I played. But with the benefit of hindsight, we now know that a lot of these people are former Trump supporters, or they are themselves Trump supporters, or they are themselves right-wing, or they are themselves part of the broader MAGA movement. Yet, and this is something I've talked about in my Charlie Kirk video, we can see that they don't care that it was right-wing activists who perpetrated these attacks. They're going after trans people. They're going after the left. Very similar to October 7th, which is the precedent for Israel to do a fucking slaughter, a fucking genocide of all Palestinian people in Gaza and the West Bank. This is the United States' reciprocal collective punishment of all dissent. Recently, Donald Trump started introducing policies that would specifically punitively categorize anti-capitalist, anti-Christian, and anti-American sentiment within terrorist attacks. Now, you may be thinking, okay, that's as easy as not getting a gun and shooting up a church or something like that. But then you have to realize, too, that it is right-wing people who are shooting up these churches. Even that one recent trans shooter that shot up the church, which I will say completely unprovoked here, is morally reprehensible, especially considering that a lot of the casualties are children. That trans person detransitioned. That trans person believed in right-wing ideology. That trans person believed in all of these horrible, violent beliefs that we have been talking about on this channel for years now. I've always maintained that the issue with gun violence in the United States is not rooted in the gun itself, but it is within the ideology. The mass shooter in Lewiston, Maine, for example, was driven by anti-Semitic and transphobic ideology. He committed a double mass shooting in the same city in the same day, and yet law enforcement were not able to catch him. He killed himself. So then, there's a double-edged sword in a policy like where Donald Trump is implementing the anti-capitalist and anti-Christian and anti-American moniker. Because first of all, this is such a vague label that even the likes of AOC or Bernie Sanders can be fingered as an anti-capitalist. That means if, say, somebody with mild anti-capitalist sentiment shoots up a church or something like that, they could be classified as an anti-Christian and anti-capitalist activist, and then all anti-capitalist people and all people who are critical of the Christian institutions like the Catholic Church or the evangelical churches or Project 2025 or the Heritage Foundation or any of that, it can result in the actions of one person being loosely affiliated with those broader sentiments, and then we all get collectively punished for it. And here's the kicker here. It doesn't have to be a leftist to do this mass shooting, right? Because mass shootings obviously result in the loss of life, and this is not something that we want. But more importantly here, it means that people who are not the fucking mass shooter are gonna have to pay for it. So that means, say like there's a mass shooter who is generally right-wing, and maybe he has some very anti-Jeffrey Epstein opinions of some sort. You know, maybe he's slightly critical of Donald Trump being on the Epstein list or something. That means that he could be fingered as an anti-American mass shooter, which will result in anybody who has anti-US imperialist sentiments to be in the crosshairs of the state apparatus. So, no matter what, no matter how all of these violent atrocities go down with the loss of life and the continued uncorrected mass shootings that continue to not stop themselves, we actually do not have a solution for those mass shootings. And more importantly, the government in particular has decided that it wants to do something different that won't even solve these mass shootings in the first place, which is punishing pretty much anybody else that is not the fucking mass shooter to begin with. And this is where I'm getting at today, right? Because we're at a point now to where we are punished for other people's actions. We are punished for the actions of those whom we're not even in cahoots with. And so we're at a point now to where we have to reconcile our own actions, our own words, our own freedom, whether we can hold on to it or not. And then we have to also recognize the finite resources that is our very own lives. And so I'm particularly known to be a pretty spicy person. I'm particularly known to speak my mind whenever I have something to say. And I tend to be somebody who is willing to uncompromise the things that I want to say. Of course, I do take a lot of things into consideration, but at the end of the day, I do feel that I should have my own sense of authority, of my own words, and more importantly, my own sense of autonomy. And so I carry myself this way. This is how I live my life. I live my life in a very unfiltered, zero bullshit life. It doesn't mean I'm not scared or that I live without fear. I totally do. But at the end of the day, I try to remind myself that if not now, when, right? Because this is one of those things that I really want to instill into people. It's one thing to recognize that things are bad. It's one thing to point out the atrocities that we see on a day-to-day basis that are cursed upon us by right-wing nutjob terrorist fuckers, but also by the state apparatus itself, which has a monopoly on violence. And then recognizing this, we have to recognize that our time on this big, beautiful blue earth is finite. We only have one life, and I don't mean to be YOLO about it, but yes, we only have one life. We only have one chance to live to the fullest, and if not now, when? If opposing fascism is not supposed to be something that we do now, when? When do we do that? And the answer is no, it should be now. Right fucking now. Currently, presently, as you're watching this video, right now. I mentioned those friends earlier who isolated themselves from me that were, within their right to do so. I'm not entirely sure how I feel about that now. I do feel that they deserve safety and security, but at the end of the day, I stood up against fascism. I stood up against oppression. I do not think that you can look at what's going on to immigrants and those who are being detained by ICE, deported, kidnapped, shoved into concentration camps, deported to countries to which these people have never been to before, with zero due process. I don't think you can look at that and then ask the Democratic Party to give a fuck anymore. And of course, legally, I can't advocate for what Willem von Spronson did. This is an infringement on my freedom of speech, by the way. What I can say is that we do need to take matters into our own hands. Because one thing that I hate more than anything is seeing Donald Trump and his administration, and the entire fucking empire for that matter, looking at this atrocity and thinking, yeah, I can keep doing it. I can keep raping the entire people of the world and just completely exploiting and crushing their souls.
They're crazy. It's like everything everywhere is going crazy, so we don't go out anymore. We sit in the house, and slowly the world we're living in is getting smaller, and all we say is, please, at least leave us alone in our living rooms. Let me have my toaster and my TV and my steel-belted radios, and I won't say anything. Just leave us alone. Well, I'm not going to leave you alone. I want you to get mad.
We don't have time for this bullshit. We need to fucking do something about it. We need to use our voices. We need to fucking be unreserved about how we truly feel, and then to use that motivation, that spirit, that fire to really make impactful change that even Barack Obama himself would never fucking dare to do. We need to be past the level of optics. We're at a point to where politicians and pundits on television, particularly Fox News more recently, if I'm being specific here, are going on talking about murdering homeless people. Brian Kilmeade went on live television on Fox News and said that homeless people should be killed, which resulted in the murder of homeless people at a homeless camp in Charlotte, North Carolina. And this is not my first time mentioning this, but Robert Foster, an ex-GOP candidate, declared that trans people and trans allies be murdered in a firing squad. This is 2 out of many instances of people declaring murder and getting away with it with no legal consequences. This is not even getting into the plethora of US politicians and Israeli politicians who have advocated for the murder of Palestinian people, and sometimes even Palestinian babies, of all things. Literal Palestinian babies. Watch my Do You Condemn Israel video to see more of that. This is the alleged party of law and order. This is the alleged party of civil society. This is the alleged party of people who look at Native Americans and call them savages. Yet these pasty, fair-skinned motherfuckers think that they can go and fucking slaughter and go on mass shootings every fucking day with all these fucking Christian nationalists with tons of guns in their fucking dad's closet, go to school and go to churches and go to malls and shoot everybody, and they can do so in the name of Jesus Christ.
We know the air is unfit to breathe and our food is unfit to eat. We sit watching our TVs while some local newscaster tells us that today we had 15 homicides and 63 violent crimes, as if that's the way it's supposed to be. We know things are bad, worse than bad.
And yet trans people, and yet leftists are the ones who are the danger in our society. Give me a fucking break. So yeah, I feel like my fucking First Amendment right of all other constitutional rights here are in fucking danger. And my friends, I hate to say this, and I say this with so much tough love, but to those people who isolated themselves from me, not only did it hurt deep down inside, but you prevented nothing. If separating yourself from me, of all things, was meant to protect you, I'm sorry, but mission failed. You're at a point now to where you're going to have to reconcile that the state apparatus is going to come after you because of the actions of right-wing activists. Not me, but right-wing activists. Fucking Nick Fuentes can go shoot up a fucking mall tomorrow, and Donald Trump will still say that it is the left that the government needs to go after and target. This means that not only is the Trump administration punitively going after people who aren't even involved in any of the violence that we're seeing in the United States right now, but we're also at a point where anybody with any semblance of right-wing sentiment have a free pass to go murder people. And let me just say right now, I challenge this point, okay? I want to see what happens. The next mass shooting that involves a right-winger, pay attention to who the Trump administration chooses to scapegoat. I promise you, it will not be other neo-Nazis or neo-fascists or conservatives or MAGA or any of that. It will be leftists. It will be trans people. It will be immigrants. It will be Palestinians. It'll be Palestinian activists. It'll be anybody who opposes the Donald Trump administration. They will not go after neo-Nazis and neo-fascists or disaffected MAGA or disaffected right-wing people who feel that Donald Trump is not right-wing enough. They're going to continue to go after people who are not even involved in this in the first place. And even if it was like a leftist or those individual trans people, collective punishment is bullshit to begin with. Not that Biden did this or anything, but if he went ahead and collectively punished neo-Nazi groups for one neo-Nazi mass shooting during his administration among the many, they'd be saying the same exact thing that I'm saying right now. They would argue that their freedom of speech is being infringed upon. So yeah, get loud. Stop being filtered. Stop censoring yourself. Say what's really on your mind here. Say it. Get a megaphone. Think about what Howard Beale would do in a situation like this. He would tell you to get mad. He would tell you to speak up and to be loud. Be angry.
All I know is that first, you've got to get mad. You've got to say, I'm a human being. God damn it!